Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Aundre Speciale, owner of Cannabis Buyers Club, Berkeley. Thank you very much for joining me today, Aundre.
Hi, happy day.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you could reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You could also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Aundre, I always like to start with a little bit of background, and especially with somebody that has such a rich legacy in the industry. What was it that first got you involved in cannabis?
Basically, I say, I got struck by lightning, and the lightning was Jack Herer. I was just so fortunate that Jack Herer was my neighbor in Venice Beach. And, I just started talking to him, saying hi to him as a neighbor. And we started talking, and he started telling me about the work that he was doing, about his book. It just went from there. I mean, I just could not believe the things that he was telling me. It was, 89, 90 at a time when the just say no thing was so intense. And the narrative was essentially weed would kill you or kill your kids, or, at the very least, put you on a path to harder drugs, certainly. And there was just nothing positive whatsoever. And meeting Jack and hearing his passion and his stories just really, blew my mind in a way that I just wanted to learn more.
So as you wanted to learn more, when did the path transition from, being intrigued by a neighbor to actually getting involved in the industry?
Well, industry is an interesting word because, we never really called it an industry until fairly recently, at least fairly recently in my journey. I decided to get involved with Jack right away because, the industry was really a path. We could not go from the conversation I had with Jack to, starting a cannabis business. Like, that isn't how it worked back then. And so what I did was I basically jumped on the bus with Jack. I started working the hemp booth and literally went on a bus that said hemp on it, help end marijuana prohibition, touring around and educating people about cannabis. And that really was the first step into creating an industry and building an industry, was having people understand that this wasn't an evil and dangerous drug, or anything new, and that was Jack's magic, is people had a lot of emotions around cannabis and its perceived dangers. And Jack just took, truth. He just took facts. His argument had no emotion in it. He would just bring scientific studies. Some of the most important things that Jack did and that we did was to show people that, this has been around forever. Jack had a Bible that was at least a couple hundred years old that was made of hemp, and we would go try to do our educational things, and people would literally be protesting us. And Jack would pull out his Bible and it said, made of hemp, and he'd say, this has been around, this is not anything new. Jack went and found copies and then proof of the copies of Hemp for Victory, which was a movie that the U.S. government made in World War II, asking farmers to grow hemp for the war effort, and associating it with patriotism. And it's such a great movie that the government denied that they made it. And that's what such a crazy time was back then. And Jack went in and found proof, and they had to admit that they made it. So the beginning of the industry truly was separating the fiction and the narrative that this was such a horrible thing, and starting, to educate people on the truth and the benefits of this wonderful plant.
What was life like on the bus? And do you remember the first time where you were meeting somebody that was kind of, let's say, stricken with reefer madness and kind of helped them see the light?
Uh, yeah. So, life was very exciting and very interesting. Especially for me, I had aged out of the system. I had, been living in a girls group home and was pretty mad, just angry at the system, and, having something that I was so passionate about. I wanted to change things, and I didn't know how, and this really gave me a direction and a vehicle. So it really, when I say over and over, it was like mind blowing. It was just mind opening for me. And uh seeing other people, start to be able to listen. And that's the thing, that most of the people that were so against this, um they it was only because of what they had been told and what they had learned. And so when we would come and show them facts, um people were they also were mind blown. Like, there's not another way to describe it. And so I think the very first time I saw that is when Jack pulled out a Bible, and some people were talking about how we were evil, and how, what we were doing. Like, they were specifically using the word evil. And Jack would pull out the book and say, "Is this book evil? This is made of hemp." And they'd be like, "What do you mean? We don't understand. Like, what do you mean it's made of hemp?" And then Jack would pull out, other things, like flyers from his book, or his book, where the emperor wears no clothes isn't Jack telling his opinion about things. If anybody's seen this book, and I highly recommend it, it's actually online at jackherrer.com for free. So that was part of Jack's thing, is just spreading the word. But page after page after page is just evidence, newspaper stories, government studies, things from the government, showing how good and necessary hemp was. Medicine bottles that had cannabis in it as medicine. And so the very first time I saw that was with the Bible. And that was actually the door that, the thing that opened a lot of doors, essentially, in people's mind, is they'd see the Bible and they'd be like, "What?" And while they were still sort of stunned from that, we'd start showing them the other thing, the medicine bottles, the newspaper articles. And so it really, it was very, very fascinating to see people come around.
What had led you to be in the system? And, as you learned this from Jack, did this give you like even less faith in the system?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, coming out of the system, you already have less faith. I mean, I can't go much lower. Just circumstances, family circumstances led me there. And uh it was it was really like I just don't have words for how, like, just bad it was. No, I don't think anybody could come out of there and have faith in the system in any way. It seems like it's set up to harm kids, honestly, or to have kids fail in life. So to come out of that, and uh and then into this, uh it made sense to me. Learning how much of the government's rhetoric about cannabis was just lies, and the government knew it was lies. I guess I was more willing to understand that's how the system worked. And like I said, it really gave me a vehicle to put sort of this anger that I had and direct it into a positive way to try to make change.
So once you did start making change on the hemp bus, when, how long were you on that journey, and where did you go after it had come to an end?
Well, I spent a couple of years with Jack doing that, and then Jack went on with doing that. I went on to try to figure some things out myself, and had a couple kids, and even in the early days when I had kids. So this was a handful of years or so in between there, and I was, basically at home with two babies, but I was still doing cannabis things. I was, so fired up. Jack just fired me up, and Jack was a lifelong friend. I stayed in very close contact with him, even when I wasn't on the hemp bus and doing that with him. My kids called him Uncle Jack. We spent just a lot of time together. Yeah. But so I was doing things in other ways. While I was home with the babies, there was a time when the federal government tried to ban all hemp food and all hemp additives. So I organized for our region a huge protest around that. And when I say a huge protest, a physical protest, media blitz, all different things that Jack had taught me. So I did that, and started working with Americans for Safe Access. I was a founding member of that, where one of the very first things we started doing was showing up when people had federal cannabis charges, because in the past, when that happened, people would just sort of get arrested and disappear. There wasn't that much media around it. There was virtually no support around it. So, for example, after 215 passed, we marched literally 1,000 people on the state capitol in Sacramento for this man, Brian Epis, when he was sentenced to 10 years for conspiracy to grow plants. It was horrible, and did a lot of media around that, a lot of education, because there's things that people just could not believe, and I think people don't even know to this day. But back then, even after 215 passed, you weren't allowed to say that you were doing anything medical, because the feds did not recognize that. So people were going to federal trial, and not being able to use the medical defense at all. So we would be out there with signs, and literature, and trying to explain to people, that cannabis could be medical. There's a really fine line, between jury tampering and education. But just being out there and trying to educate the general public about cannabis's medical uses, as well as just having a presence. During Brian's trial, we were out there every single day, just so people would know, that this was happening. And so Brian would know that he wasn't going to just disappear. So I just sort of segued into that work, because I actually would take my kids, I'd literally take my baby at every protest we did.
So you would actually take your kids to the protest with you. I think that's extremely healthy. I think that it's really good. And I've taken I have two small children, and I've taken them to protest just so they can sort of see people taking a stand and standing up for what they believe in.
Yeah, I think it was really important too. I mean, for me, I didn't have money for babysitters. Being an activist does not pay anything at all. So if I wanted to do the work that I was doing, they had to come. But I agree with you. It's very, very important. It made my kids very compassionate, first of all, because they, from their earliest memory, were around some very sick people.
So your children, became compassionate because they were around these types of people. Could you go on about that a little bit, about building that type of compassion? And then how did the trial end up for Brian?
It really did teach my kids a lot of empathy, and also importantly, not to just believe everything that you're told. And um, I think that, is very important. It also, now that my kids are adults, it gave them some really cool pictures. We have a picture of my daughter when she was about 4 on a tricycle, with a huge American for Safe Access banner behind her and about 300 people marching behind her. And she's at the front of the line wearing a Americans for Safe Access shirt on her tricycle leading the parade, and
That's incredible.
but, unfortunately, Brian Epis ended up being sentenced to 10 years and doing 10 full years. And we did some court support for him and his family. He had a daughter just slightly older than my daughter, who was coming to the protests and speaking about her dad. And it was just, it was very heartbreaking. And, one of the things that's just absolute BS is that at some point during the trial, I guess the jury asked, is this a medical cannabis case? Because they had seen us down there with our signs and stuff. And the judge dismissed the jury and brought in a new jury that was sequestered so that they couldn't see the signs, so that they couldn't learn the truth that this was a medical cannabis case. And so, I mean, to me, that's the most, un-American evil thing I could think of is, let the jury hear the facts and let them decide. But that wasn't the case. And in fact, at that time, if you ended up in federal court, the medical cannabis law in California kind of weighed against you because the jury would convict and then afterwards find out it was medical and say, we assumed 100% it must not be medical, because they would have brought it up at trial.
That's incredibly frustrating. And I do thank you very much for your advocacy, just because, your work helped build the foundation for the market as we know it now. I want to get into your work with the Cannabis Buyers Club, Berkeley.
Yes.
When did you found that? I mean, it looks like you've been doing it for nearly 20 years.
Well, I had a different path to get there. I actually opened several dispensaries. And so it was definitely a path to get to where I am today. I opened one initially in San Francisco with a dear friend and longtime activist, Charlie Pappas, that was paralyzed from the neck down. He had actually been shot in a robbery over, like a $5 bag of weed back in the early 80s. And just really an incredible activist. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. But my very first one, we opened in San Francisco and had a neighbor that was so upset that we were on their block, and they were a mom and said, that we were evil drug dealers, and just basically called every law enforcement there was on the planet on us multiple times a day. So we voluntarily shut down. We said, okay, this isn't going to work. And then the next one I opened was in Sacramento, and Capital Wellness. And for me, that one is so special because we truly were in an area where Sacramento is the Eastern District of the state. The state of California is broken into multiple districts, and the Eastern District is known as being the worst by far. Very, very, very conservative. And that's where I had been living at the time. And so I opened there. I was one of perhaps three at the time. And really wanted to come in with this model of compassion that I had really been thinking in my mind. When I did a lot of activism, we just sort of touched on our work, but especially with Americans for Safe Access. I went around and would sit. There's very few dispensaries in the state, but I would go in there and sit and we made these amazing know your rights cards, which gave people, it was a little fold up and gave people basic advice and info about your rights. And by advice, I mean, like, we'd tell people always keep your cannabis locked in the car. The police, don't give them permission, locked in your trunk. Don't give the police permission to open your trunk, that they, just different types of advice like that. And I would sit in the few dispensaries and take data of people that had been arrested. And also at the ASA office, we'd have a number to call. We'd say, if you've been arrested, let us know. And so I would sit and take info about that. And one of the things, for example, that we found out was that the CHP said that they're not going to follow state law. And they just completely, that was their policy. There's no such thing as medical cannabis. And so we started lawsuits around that. And, when Ed Rosenthal had his trial, he had been deputized by the city of Oakland to grow cannabis for sick people. And at his trial, after he was found guilty, we all waited and approached the jury, and when they came out and told them that this was a medical case, and the jury actually held a press conference and said that they had been tricked by the government. So this was all kind of the work that we were doing that felt so important, but there was never any money for it. There was so much to be done, and there were so many people that needed help. So truly, I opened my first dispensary as a nonprofit, as we were required by the law. My goal was to open a dispensary and operate as a nonprofit, as required by the law, but to be able to put funds to the work that was never funded, to the activism that needed support, to the social programs in our community that needed support. And that's probably one of the most important things that Jack taught me. And honestly, other people as well. The Black Panthers, they actually shared a wall with CBCB's original location, and they were a really good example of just going out and do what needs to be done. After I came out of the system, I was kind of angry and like, somebody needs to do something. And people that were doing these other programs taught me, it's us. We're the ones that need to do something. Don't wait for anybody to come save you. So when I opened my first dispensary, it was with the goal to not only provide this medicine to very sick people, I also wanted to provide a space for sick people to gather, because people were pretty isolated, and then funnel some funds towards the activism and towards social programs.
Were you happy with what you were able to fundraise to help support those efforts?
Oh my gosh. Yes, the work that we did in Sacramento, and it was never just me. Like I have to say that. I always say that I'm great with coming with an idea and a building, and then the people that come and want to be a part of that, that's all part of the magic. It's never just one person. And we did such incredible things there. Truly, again, when people talk about the industry, a big part of building this industry was changing hearts and minds. There wasn't really a time that you could just go from, you know, this is your brain frying, the old Dare commercials and stuff, to just opening a shop. And so when I did open in Sacramento, basically back then you just needed to be willing to go to jail. That literally was about it. Because we opened over there for $9,000. Somebody loaned us $9,000 because they liked our activism and they liked our plan. And we went to the worst part of town with the crappiest building that had been abandoned for a long time. The whole block beside it, a literal block, was a dump. People had just been dumping there for I don't know how long. And so we went in there, and the very first thing we did was cleaned up the building, got a bunch of volunteers, literally cleaned up the whole dump area. Um, uh, you know, there was an elderly person next door that had grass shoulder high. We went and we cut their grass and started maintaining their yard. We put security guards on that block to make sure that there was no more dumping and other things. And neighbors started noticing and coming by and saying, what are you doing? What is this place? And we told them. And they would be like, wow, this is incredible. And then neighbors would start asking, how can I get involved? Whether they use cannabis or not, they'd say, well, you know what? I want to volunteer. Like, do you need anybody? I could help paint my neighbor's house. Or, it was just so incredible. There was a bank down the street. And, one day the bank manager came and started banging on our door and said, I heard there's drugs being sold here. And, this is a terrible neighborhood. You can't be doing this. And I said, I know we're here. We want to help clean up the neighborhood. Do you notice the dump is gone? And, and he said, that's you. And basically started an amazing relationship with the bank manager and the bank. And so these were things that, again, person by person, block by block, city by city, you had to change people's hearts and minds by example, by, more than words. And what we ended up doing there, because we operated as a true nonprofit, I actually rented the building next to us and started a community center, because the other thing that I learned is that seriously ill people often are very isolated, and they crave community, they crave connection, and there just really wasn't somewhere that was giving people that. So I rented the building next door, and I started a program where to join the collective, you had to agree to either you had to participate in the community center. So you had to either agree to join a class. All you had to do was take a class, or show up for a movie or a social event, or volunteer. And so people got really excited about that. I wanted to make sure that the people that came into the collective were on the same page. And I did a program where I would trade people cannabis for their services. And so we at one point had over 200 individual classes at the community center every month. And it was everything from free haircuts to we had 2 teachers that I was trading cannabis for, and they would come, and one was doing adult literacy classes and another was doing resume assistance. And so we had things like that there. And because it was separate from the collective, people from the community could come in and join those classes as well. They didn't have to use cannabis. And so it really was such a special place. For example, there people could do anything they wanted. There was a patient we had that had schizophrenia, and he wanted to do a class about saltwater fish, and it ended up being a schizophrenia support group, around fish tanks and stuff. So it was just, I could go on and on. It was just so magical. And then we also connected with places in the community. We became top 10%. We were honored by Shriners Children's Hospital, top 10% of donors of all time. And we made sure they knew where this support was coming from. And then we also asked our community, our membership group. We had somebody that was a patient at the collective that owned a shipping company and somehow ended up with a container full of toys that we ended up donating to Shriners Children's Hospital, like, thousands and thousands of toys. And let them know this is from a medical cannabis group. I approached the local homeless shelter that was run by the Catholic Church, and we helped fund a homeless preschool. And that was with this amazing woman, Sister Libby. And when I said to her, I said, because I had told her who we were, and she was like, that's great, let's do this work. And I said, I just really want to be sure that you understand that we are a medical cannabis dispensary, and I don't want to get you guys in trouble or anything. And she literally said, the Lord works in mysterious ways, let's go. So we did all that work, and politicians started coming by, city officials started coming by, and people were really fascinated with the work and became really positive about what we were doing.
You said the one qualification for starting a dispensary back then was that you had to be willing to go to jail.
Yes.
Were you sent to jail?
Oh, yes. I was. I was sent to jail. So I went in, I opened the first dispensary in Venice Beach, at the beach, because that's where I was from. So a year after I opened my Sacramento dispensary, I went down there to open there and did the same thing, opened a community center, and pretty quickly went through a major raid. It was really bad. They spent 2 years sort of threatening me and trying to get me to take a plea deal. I think the best plea deal they got down to was 2 years in jail. And I'm a single mom. I was a single mom. And they were trying to get me to accept and agree to go to jail for 2 years, and telling me that was a bargain somehow. They told me that they were afraid that they had to make an example of me because they were afraid that cannabis businesses would proliferate the tourist zone in Venice. And I don't know if anybody's been there now, but it's fully proliferated. But they, and they also do dirty tricks. This is like, don't trust the system. One of the things they did was they set a court case they set an appearance, and I had amazing attorneys. I had attorneys that also stepped forward to help for free because of my activism and my work with Americans for Safe Access and other groups. There was attorneys that would come and try to help, especially if you had been the first to go into an area. And so I had the best attorneys, and they set this court case and later acknowledged that they forgot to let any of us know. They didn't send us notice. And then they came to my house one day on Halloween. You know, I went back to Northern California, and I was walking out of my door with my little puppy dressed like Luke Skywalker. On my way to my kids' school for their Halloween parade, where my son was dressed like Luke Skywalker. So I was going to surprise him with his puppy dressed like that. And I walked out the door and literally just got knocked down by the police, like just grab me all rough, throw me down, handcuff me for a felony failure to appear. And then they, you know, so then I went to jail. They took a very long time to try to let me get bail, and they just do these tricks, and then they'd be like, okay, are you ready to, you know, to make a deal on the case? And I wasn't. And right until I believe it was the day before the jury selection was going to begin, they dropped the case. So I had that one. And then in Sacramento one time, I was caught with some hash, and the police officer was going to take it because he said that hash wasn't included under medical cannabis law. And I argued the point with him. And unfortunately, I probably should have just let it go. I said, you're not stealing my property. It's perfectly legal. Here are my papers, and insisted. And he said, okay, why don't I just take you to jail and we'll have the judge sort it out. So that's, yeah, been jail a few times, and have to say that the terrifying part is you never know if or when the feds are going to pick up the case. Because, you know, while I'm doing all this, I see friends and people going down for very long sentences in the federal system. You know, also in the Eastern District was a man, Luke Scarmazzo, that he went down. He got 16 years, I believe, for operating a dispensary legally in the state of California. There's no other charges. But they made an example out of him. And that was the fear that you could be the next one. And it went all the way down to my kids. Because we knew, you know, it was such a risk about what we were doing, my kids had to have raid training as well. And so I taught my kids, you know, that you guys see what we're doing. You understand it's very important, but the police are, you know, even though they're our friends, and if you ever get lost or need help, you should go to the police. They also don't exactly understand what it is we're doing. And there could be a time where I would always say that they make a mistake and they come to our house. And if, you know, if you ever hear banging, if the door ever kicks in, I would have them practice. You have to go to your knees and go like this. I know people nowadays might not understand, like that sounds dramatic, but there were and there have been kids that have been seriously injured and even killed in police raids because of them running around, because there was a tragic case where about a 10 or 12-year-old little boy picked up a baseball bat and ran at the police because he didn't understand what was happening. And so I would practice with the kids. I'd say, okay, the door goes boom, and they'd go down on their knees and they'd go like this. And then I'd have them repeat, you know, If the police ask you any questions, you just repeat, this is my name, this is my age, this is the number that you call for my auntie. And so they would repeat that over and over. And so my kids understood the consequences and sort of the fear of the federal government, especially after being part of the protest for Brian Epps and being around his daughter and stuff. And so the second time I was arrested, when I finally got a call, well, we enact the raid plan. So as I was being arrested, I got a call off to Americans for Safe Access to somebody from there and said, I'm being raided. And they enact a raid plan that we had. And so my kids' school and their teachers were part of that raid plan. And they understood that one day this might happen. And so, the teacher let the kids know, and somebody came and picked my kids up and were with my kids. And so when I finally got a call to them, my daughter, who this time she was about 9, she just answered the phone and just gave such a heart-wrenching scream, like, and said, Mommy, is it the feds? Do the feds have you? And so this really, it just really affected our family in a lot of ways. I'm so fortunate, I still feel the trauma of that time, and financially, emotionally, just devastating, that still to this day, I feel like affects me in some ways. And yet what I went through was nothing compared to, say, Luke Scarmazzo and other people like him, that actually he did 15 years in federal prison away from his young daughter. So it was just devastating.
Well, that's one thing that sticks with me, is that, you're faced with this very real possibility that you could be away from your children, until they're in their late teens and 20s. Like, how do you keep going to work every day? How do you keep doing it, when that's the risk?
Definitely, because of what I had been through in the system, most of the people at the time, doing what I was doing, had been marginalized in some ways. Dennis Perone did what he did because his partner and everyone that he loved was dying of AIDS, and nobody, especially our government, wanted to provide any help. My mentor, and my business mentor, somebody that was operating in Sacramento at the same time as me, I had no business experience. This guy, Bill Pierce, had business experience, and so he sort of mentored me on the business side. He had been in the Vietnam War and been sprayed by Agent Orange and was dying of cancer. And at the time, the government was denying that he got the cancer from Agent Orange. So it was, I feel like a lot of times when people go through things like that, you can take your anger at the system and your, trauma from the system and self-destruct, and so for me, this was the healthiest way I feel like to deal with that trauma, was to try to change things.
I feel that not just in this industry, but in our culture right now in general, there are people that are afraid to stand up against things that they don't believe in. What do you say to people when you run into them in your life now, just with everything that you have fought for and everything that you have fought through, what can you say to people that are otherwise afraid to kind of stand up to power, because of fear?
That it's going to eat you alive, that it's better for you, it's better for everybody, to go out there and do what you believe in. I mean, otherwise, yeah, I feel like it's just going to affect yourself negatively. And, one important thing that I've learned about this is, I've opened several dispensaries across the state, 6. And in every city I opened, we also open a community center because that's part of my model. And what I learned, I started with no business experience, and that really gave me actually the freedom to create something. I think that's different because I didn't know any better. And so what I've learned over and over is that love truly is the best business model. And I know sometimes, people are like, oh, some California, you know, BS or whatever. But no, like over and over and over, when you operate in a way that benefits your community and your community members, it benefits your business. It ends up because, with regulations, with officials, all the way down to customers. At CBCB right now, we have a huge compassion program. When you walk into CBCB, half of our front lobby is a free food bank. We have a community fridge and shelves of food where people can either drop food off or take food. And we have people that tell us they would never waste their money. They use the word waste. I will never waste my money at another dispensary because they don't give back in the way that you give back. And so, people will come and spend money and buy an eighth at our dispensary and leave knowing that they've also done kind of a good deed. And so I think that that's part of a thing that, people with the traditional business education or experience are missing out on.
You'd mentioned you've started 6 different dispensaries. At what point, after you've transformed the community, at what point do you make the decision to move on to another challenge?
A lot of times, several times. So when you operate like that, like I was saying, people want to be part of it. And so a lot of times the opportunities would come to me. People would reach out to me and saying, we want something like this in our community. And that is actually how I ended up working with CBCB, is that I was not, that's the only dispensary that I wasn't the original founder of. It was founded by a man called Jim Squatter, an anarchist, uh, just also wanting to do, in the nonprofit sector, wanting to do good things for his community. And he reached out to me and basically wanted to pass the torch. So that's how I took over CBCB. CBCB started in 1996. We're getting close to celebrating our 30th anniversary there. And we actually have somebody that has worked the counter since 1997. His name's Jay, and he just loves to be out there, out front with the people. We have people that have been coming to us for decades that only want to work with Jay. He has a support group once a week for people that either want to quit smoking cannabis or want to stop altogether. But he has a support group for that.
Is Jay the first bud tender?
Jay is the first bud. Jay is definitely, I think, the oldest bud tender, or the longest running bud tender in the country.
Oh my goodness. Well, is
Yes.
it I read, do your kids also help you operate the business?
Yep. So now my kids actually run the business, which is a dream come true. Um, Last year, I sort of downsized. I separated from my partners. We were operating I went on to do a lot of things. I actually opened 2 dispensaries with Montel Williams.
Yeah, I saw that. How did that come together?
You know, so I was on the board of Marijuana Policy Project. I was vice chair, and that was incredible. On the celebrity board, like was Susan Sarandon and Larry Hagman, and um, I just got to travel in this world of, of celebrities and politicians. Is very interesting. And I met Montel, and he really is a very, very compassionate man, and was interested in the compassion work that I was doing. I mean, again, this is an example of love is the best business model. This is what set me apart. This is what got Montel's interest in working with me. And he just wanted to be a part of it. And so we opened 2 dispensaries together.
How did those ventures go?
They went great. The both places are still operating today. At some point Montel left just because he was doing other things really in the entertainment space. And I think, once he got them open, he was ready to move on to the next project. But I stayed with my partners for another 10 years, and we did a lot of very interesting things. We got plant IP and research, and did a lot of work with terpenes, created a terpene testing program. After kind of decades of travel across the state and work in various cities, just kind of got ready to retire essentially. And so last year I essentially retired and just left with CBCB, which is my local dispensary. Was the biggest one of our group. And I just wanted an opportunity, honestly, to work with my kids. And that's what I'm doing now. And me, this is the dream come true. People talk about what's your buyout number, what's your this, what's your that, and this is it. There is nothing better than running a family business with your kids. It's my dream come true.
I understand that you operate on the compassion model, but when it comes to what you're putting on your shelves, how do you source from the community or from suppliers? What do you look for in terms of what's going on the shelves?
Well, I mean, first is quality. I have talked so much about the compassion model. The nuts and bolts of things is you have to have the best products at the best pricing. And so, given my long experience in this space, I feel like I have access to truly the best growers in the state. And so that's number one. Always source organically, and whenever possible, that's very important. The way I go up and see people's farms because I like to see how they grow. And then, I want to work with like-minded people. So once you have the best product, the best pricing, ethically, grown and produced, then I want to work with people that have the compassion mindset as well, that are going to work with me in the compassion program and want to help give back.
So one thing that I've heard from various markets around the US is that once recreational markets open up, that it really depresses the medical markets. After recreational markets open up, do you believe that medical dispensaries still serve a purpose, and how can they fight to survive a rec market?
I mean, we have to be both. we definitely have to be both, but it's very interesting. I mean, the state, honestly, in California, it's a really rough road over here because I feel like in some ways they've been it almost couldn't be designed better to destroy the market. And, initially at legalization, the state tried to make it illegal to give compassion away. And so we worked with ourselves, and the original dispensaries in Berkeley worked with the city to enact a law saying that dispensaries in Berkeley have to give a certain percentage of their gross away to low income Berkeley residents. Like, they mandated a compassion program so we could, try to get around the state law saying you're not allowed to give compassion. I mean, it's so insane. Now, there's been some changes and stuff, but the other thing, so right now in Berkeley, our customers are paying 34.25% tax, and that is, that's just crushing us. So that is crushing the compassion program, because right now you can go down the street and pick hemp up from hemp shops and any head shop, and they don't charge any taxes. They have the same products that we do, frankly, with zero taxes and zero compassion programs. So that's what's killing the compassion programs. Like, we need recreational to be able to support our compassion and medical programs, but they're making it so hard to compete. A 34% tax makes it very, very hard. Like, I don't blame customers that love us, that want to do the right thing, that want to support compassionate business, but can you consistently pay 34% more? So that's just a real problem.
How do you fix that?
You know, it's getting harder. We're trying, but the industry really has been it's more divided than I've ever seen it. It used to feel like we were all aligned, working towards the same goal, and now it feels like there's different camps. There's the hemp camp and the cannabis camp, which, even way back when I was with Jack, people were trying to say there was a difference. And Jack was like, no, it is the same plant, and so the support is divided, because there's some people that are only working on hemp and some people only working on the cannabis issue. And it's a little bit contentious between the two. And then there's these big corporations that are kind of coming in, and they're just operating at a loss, burning investor money, trying to, I guess, wait till everybody else is gone, and they can, run the market. So it's very difficult. And I think that, we're trying to do what we can, but the support is fractured. And honestly, I'm feeling more and more like maybe hemp is going to be the way. It's essentially legal in much of the country, just under the name of hemp. So I don't know. We'll have to see.
Well, I really do appreciate you taking the time. And I feel like I could continue this conversation for hours. So I hope we have a chance to fill in some of the gaps along the way. But one thing I really wanted to ask is, at what point of your journey did you stop feeling like, or people stop shouting at you that you were the evil drug dealer and, you were a cornerstone of the community?
Wow, that's a great question. Probably, uh, probably about the time of legalization, up until then, it had been rough. Even, like, especially being a single mom, there was even people that were supportive and were pro cannabis that would say, but not for you. You can't do it because you're a mom, you know? And so I think that that stigma was here until very, very recently. But about the time of legalization, there really seemed to be a shift where people just started to understand, like, hey, this is, you know, I know tons of people that use weed and it's not bad.
Well, before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself, your work in the cannabis industry, or anything else before we get out of here?
I mean, I think we covered a lot of things. I think, the biggest thing I would say, or the message would be that, unity is what moves this forward. That, I think having us all fractured into different groups only lets the powers that be, or the system, take advantage. And I think that the more we're all united together towards a common goal, is very important.
I think that's very important as well. And it sounds like, you retired a little bit, but it just means that you went down to like 78-hour work weeks.
Yeah, when I say retired, actually, exactly. I retired from, having so many stores and stuff, and my kids have taken over operation of the shop, because I do want to go back to more of the activism and more of, I'm running an amazing community center in Berkeley, where we have teamed up with local groups. For example, we teamed up with original Black Panther members, and we're bringing back the community survival program, where right now we set up a 100% free farmers market. We have dance classes. We have support groups, free movie night, things like that. So I'm kind of going back to my passion. Honestly, my passion is not books and the regulations that we have right now. My passion is the community center. And so that's, working on new regulations, working on supporting community groups. That's back to my passion.
Well, thank you for everything, Aundre. It's very inspiring.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email, the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Aundre Speciale, owner of Cannabis Buyers Club Berkeley, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.